Hey, open a public hearing, lease a city-owned property located at 245 North 7th Street. I want to turn it over to our administrator, John Walsh.
Okay, this is a proposed ground lease between the City of St. Helens and the 7th Street Container Lofts LLC, a limited liability company. It's been advertised as under ORS 221.727, the sale of property by a city, uh, though it's technically not required. We'll find out, and I'll disclose why here. There is an option in this property, but it's the option for the city sell, not for the option for the applicant to buy. So at the end of the lease term, it's materially different that the city retains that right to not sell the property. And the property, as the mayor mentioned, is at 245 North 7th Street. It's across from the 6th Street Park. There's an exhibit up on the map there. It is a public-private partnership aimed at something we've been working on for quite some time. There's been some press coverage over this. It's adjacent to the 6th Street Park. The public-private piece is that the city retains ownership of the land, and will collect a lease rate over time. The developer builds a parking lot that has spaces open to the public, makes improvements along the frontage there. And so to talk about the details of the transaction, the pro forma that we worked with to negotiate on the developer had the land price based at about $200,000 as a land value. And they proposed a 50-year lease with 2 renewable extensions, so it's 50 years, 50 years, 50 years, and after the end of 150 years, it's a fixed 8,100 and 8,126, I believe, is the 8,160 per year lease on an 8-unit multifamily complex. The housing type is it's certified by the state. It's a container, real innovative, modern-looking housing product that comes kind of pre-approved, kind of under the manufactured housing program. There will be utilities and all the same stuff that regular homes have, handicap parking places and the like. So the finding of value would be that the city could sell it today for $200,000. The developer would probably buy it, but his interest is in providing affordable owner-occupied housing options. So there'll be a condominium association that will have rules that they're owner-occupied, and there's some provisions in there for a little bit of flexible terms. So it's either $200,000 today, or we collect rent for 150 years at a value of $1.2 million over time. So there's also some credits for permit fees. The city's agreeing by this in concession for the parking lot, and the other factors is to waive up to $40,000 of permit fees. The first $40,000, he'll pay $40,000. Anything over that, the city picks up. And similarly with the construction costs of the parking lot, there's a credit for that too. The six of 18 stalls, they're 6 public of the 18 stalls are public spaces. And I think that's it's much more complex. We've been working for almost a couple years on this project to bring it to the point. It's had some press. It's had a conditional use permit through land use approved, and I think that's pretty close. So if there's anybody that'd like to talk for or against it, this would be a good opportunity. And watch your head on the door.
Al Peterson. Question number 1. Did you get an appraisal?
Eco Northwest looked at the value. Not a formal appraisal, but we looked at the value of the property.
So no formal appraisal?
No formal appraisal, right?
Okay. I'm a little bit wondering, it says in here that you are leasing the property, and then you're going to turn it into condominium type ownership, which I'm a little bit confused on how you can have a condominium ownership over the top of leased real property.
Yeah, it's possible. You can do that.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm saying that, but as we've been advised legally that our lawyers have assured
Okay.
us that that's possible.
Okay. And then it says in here that it's a leasehold and it's of, I just got this.
Sure.
So I hadn't had a chance to go through it, but about 5 minutes. It says in here that it's a leasehold with well, it's a little hard to figure out here because I assume you're the landlord in this.
The city is the landlord, and that's the
City's the landlord, and the tenant is the 7th Street Container Lofts, and then what is the relationship between 7th Street Container Lofts as the tenant currently and the condominium owners?
Well, the condominium hasn't happened yet. I think it's going to get built first before it's...
Well, I realize that, but you have to have some provision in there for that.
Yes.
There is.
Where?
It's 25 pages here. Let me...
Well, you've read it
Yeah, I
many
have.
more times than I have.
I know, yeah, and I have. I suspect. Yeah, under E. Yeah, under the recitals, under E talks about some of that.
Okay, well, so the other question I have is, you mentioned you're going to waive, it sounds like, system development fees. Could you repeat that? Because I didn't quite get it.
It's going to be a waiver. The developer is going to pay the first $40,000 in permit fees collectively with SDCs and building permit fees. Anything above that, the city will waive.
So for 8 residential units, the approximate value for system development fees is like $12,000 to $15,000 each.
Yeah,
I don't know the exact
They're
number.
640 square feet, so they're fairly small, but
Well,
yeah.
the system development fees don't go by square footage,
Yeah.
they go by dwelling units. So you have 8 dwelling units, and the dwelling units for each system development charge based on dwelling units is somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000. So let's say 15, because it's easier to do the math, so that we're talking about 80 plus another 20, so it's roughly $100,000 in system development fees, probably a little less. And you're going to waive 60,000?
So this is a public-private partnership where it's an affordable housing metric where we're trying to attract housing, diverse
Okay.
housing types. So there's that element of concessions.
Okay, so then the next question I have relative to the affordable housing question is, if this is going to be a condominium type ownership, how are the sales of the condominiums going to be set?
It's prescribed in here
Okay.
as far as owner occupied and the types of
I think 2.1.3. maybe addresses that.
And basically, what I'm asking is, if indeed this is a low-income housing scheme, are you basing the sales of the unit based on, I don't know, 60% of, the median income, or how's that being done? Because that's how they're normally done.
We had that's been part of the dialogue
Yep,
going
back and
through
forth.
this back and forth about the target price, and I think his unit first sales price is going to be like low 110. I think is what he's talking about selling them for.
Oh, okay.
So what they are, because I see a lot of faces out in the audience, is what they are is they're container ships that actually go up and down the river on the bigger ships. And we as Americans import a lot more than we ever export. So they only get used once and then they go sit in a yard. And he's just doing a reclamation of these container ships, and he's had them engineered at the state level, and is proposing to pick our area to be innovative too, and put up an eightplex. So that's what's going on here. I see a lot of faces out there.
Yeah, this is the same developer as the Muckle building next door. And he did at one point brought in a proposal for a larger building on the waterfront, but we kind of pushed this out to a.
So where is that?
It's adjacent to 6th Street Park.
No, where is the clause about how you're establishing the sales of the tenants?
I think 2.3 is.
2.1.3, tenant, and upon assignment of this lease by tenant to condominium association, then the condominium association will manage the construction, sale, and move-in process, and will either self-manage or establish or hire a management company to ensure rent and tax payments are made, etc.
Right, but what I'm asking is, if this is a low-income housing scheme, like you just said, and in most circumstances, these types of schemes are based on either a median income or some kind of metric where you establish how these are going to be, how they're truly, low income based on some metric, and I don't see that in here.
In prior discussions, we talked about this and involved Keith Locke with, who answered for the CAT program, the Community Action Team, and I believe they have that matrix.
Well, this is the only information that we have available, which we have right here. And also, when you sign a contract, that matrix needs to be in the contract, or you don't have a matrix. You got to establish that when you sign the contract. So if it's not in writing and it's not in here, you don't have one yet. So if you're going to lease it and just assume for future that you're going to have a matrix, you don't have it in writing yet.
I don't think that's what Councilor Morton is referring to. I mean, the matrix is out there, what low-income standards are, but the.
Right, but if you don't
I
reference
understand what you're saying.
something,
Yeah.
you don't have it. You don't have it in the
Yeah,
contract.
I understood.
Yes.
And I recommend that you do have it in the contract so people know what you're shooting for. And you know what you're shooting for, so that when these actually get sold, they don't get sold for something you hadn't anticipated in the first place.
Yeah, the performa and other supporting documents around this have those kinds of the price points, and but they didn't get incorporated into the lease. You're right. You're correct about that.
So I recommend that you do incorporate them into the lease, either as a paragraph or by reference specifically. Not that I think it's a great idea. I think that as an architect, I've done 2 container restaurants, and I think that the container idea is a great thing to do, and it is innovative, and it's done all over the world, and there are some really great projects out there. It's just that, I just picked this up and I looked through it, and those are the items that I saw that I think you should take a look at. And get it in writing in the lease before you sign the lease.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For you. Just for my own understanding, because the whole lease and how you sell condos and how you have the lease property, wouldn't this be similar to like a manufactured home park? Because the way, when we were originally talked to Carl, when he talked about it, is they would be able to be moved here, people could move them to a different site. When they own them, it could be like, kind of like Legos, they could be plugged in anywhere. Is the way they were described to me, that they would be movable. That's why, like, at the end of the process, they could decide, we could decide that, this could go somewhere else.
How many stories is this?
It's 4/4.
Yeah, I can't see because all we have is a site plan. Well, that's possible. The only issues related to that are the utilities. You know, if you're planning on moving them elsewhere in the future, there's actually a couple of items. One is the utilities, and then one is the weatherproofing, because weatherproofing and insulation, because those two items are prescribed by code. And then when you start to break it apart,
That
then
could be compromised.
yeah, that's all going to be compromised. And so, for example, this building, technically, you only need the insulation enclosure around the outside. The two units in the middle, between the units, you don't necessarily need insulation. So if you break these apart, now you have a unit that has the two middle units. They only have insulation on the front wall and the back wall.
Maybe.
They're not going to have insulation on the side walls.
Maybe sometimes, and I don't, not to get off track, but sometimes for soundproofing and for insulation, you have them in between.
Right, for soundproofing, but you won't have a weather barrier.
Oh.
So it depends on how they build
How
it.
they build
and
them.
I don't know
Okay.
their
I was
construction
just
types.
asking
Right.
wanting your input as, because you are
And that's,
kind of
yeah,
more
and the
skilled than
restaurants
I am
we,
in the building.
yeah, and the restaurants that we did, that was, I mean, it's always the major issue down, when you can get these built down south because you aren't required as much insulation, where you can kind of get the insulation in the corrugation in a little bit. Where, however, in
Here.
Oregon and in the north, you're required more or less 6 inches of insulation, even if you use high performance insulation. So then you have to make a choice. Okay, do we put the insulation on the inside or do we put the insulation on the outside?
Okay.
And where do you put the weather barrier? So, I mean, from a construction standpoint, that's kind of the issue.
Super.
But anyway, I'm just think you should take a look at the contract and make sure that you get some of these clauses in that you say you want, which I don't see in here. I think it's a great project and I hope it's successful.
I'm glad you stepped forward to testify and to give us your advice that you have experienced with this kind of construction.
Right.
Because it's totally new to me. When I looked at it, I go, wow, what a concept. And then I visited cities in Europe that had those kinds of constructions, and I was very impressed. Matter of fact, Los Angeles has that type of construction as well in various areas,
Right.
which I haven't visited, but I've seen pictures and studies of. So I appreciate your expertise as we move forward on this. I hope that you step forward as well and give us any kind of expertise that you have. It's very much welcome.
Okay. Hearing's closed.
Oh, there was
Yes.
more comments.
Well, come on up.
Hearing's unclosed.
She paused. She took a breath.
I'm sorry. I know you didn't give a lot of time. You got a lot going on here, but there's a couple of things that I agree with Mr. Peterson. That first and foremost, my name is Shauna Harrison. I am. I just wanted to talk about the. So, you guys essentially are going to act as a subletter of the land to the container lofts, correct?
We are, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
least
We are
Okay.
named.
So after 50 years, he can buy it out for $10, correct?
No.
Okay, so that is in the contract up at the top.
It automatic renews for 50 years. And then
For another 80 a unit, right? Roughly.
Yeah, no, it says it right up in here. So, I mean, my concern is you're going to be making provisions, lots of things like Habitat for Humanity. You already have a contract with Habitat for Humanity whenever we give them property per se, or sell them property, and then the people have a vested interest in the property to own it. With a condo, they're never going to own the dirt, they're just going to own the condo itself. But my biggest concern was in here in regards to the option terms and the 50-year lease option terms. And in 1.2.3, at the end of the last option term, landlord in its sole absolute discretion will either extend the term with the pattern established during the initial 150-year term, or if the premise can be legally partitioned, will sell the premises to the condominium association for $10, with condominium association paying all transfer and closing costs. If landlord does not take either action in the subsequent, by the end of the last option term, this lease will automatically renew for an additional 50-year option. So that's, I'm all about, I think actually this is a great plan. I'm just concerned about supplementing more people to build properties with minimal vested interest for us as a city, and our recourse for land that we're going to essentially burden, you know, the taxpayers with, because we're going to give them basically an incentive, and then possibly not having enough provisions inside this document that you guys have provided as far as the ground lease to help exercise our rights as a city.
And I hear that. Now, it's a 150-year lease, I do believe, and then potential, what you read was a $10 purchase price at that time. I don't know if it was, if what they're looking at, and I can only speculate what they're looking at, is that maybe that's what they're expecting the life of maybe a container to last is 150, and that would be really why that is in there. But it's about I think it figures out to a little over $1 million in the 150 years. 1.2, I do believe, will in that 150-year lease.
Okay.
So.
It's really difficult, obviously, without a building plan to kind of get an idea of the value. But I definitely share Mr. Peterson's sentiment in regards to having at least a clause of some sort that has a percentage. You know, when we're looking at low-income housing and things like that, there's median income provisions and things of that nature. Obviously, depending on how the building site goes and when it all transpires, where the market's going to be at fair market price. You know, it's kind of hard to set prices of things right now when they're not even here yet. But I definitely think, you know, there needs to be something. And if you can refer me to it, please do. And I share the same sentiment. I didn't have a whole lot of time to review this. I reviewed it to the best of my ability with the time I was given. However, I am concerned that there isn't, there's not, thinking of the word to say, I'm concerned that there's not enough provisions to ensure our investment for the long haul. And that's one of my biggest concerns, hands down, is that this lease is missing some pretty substantial things in here that are important for everybody for the goal that we have at hand. And I think that there definitely needs to be some consideration, and there needs to be some verbiage in regards to how this is going to pan out the way that you want it to. Because as Mr. Peterson said, the way that it's written, there's not really anything in here in regards to setting a standard for value of these units. So that's it. Unless you want to tell me, do you have any place to reference me? Or I can maybe.
All I can tell you is I've had a couple deaths on both sides of my family, and my brother just had a stroke yesterday, and we just got this back from an attorney. I really haven't had. I know in the original discussion that it was $80 per unit that was going to be paying us for 150 years, and that totaled to 1.2 million, and that this is a good reclamation project of being green and doing something with some container ships. Or some containers out of the ships, and that's all I can tell you personally from my standpoint. I apologize that I'm kind of vocal, but it's been a very rough and less than a little over a month. Charlie Scholl, Dave Locke, and my brother Kurt had a stroke in Hawaii yesterday. I'm a little stressed.
Well, I apologize for anybody's stress, but as we all know, it's always helpful sometimes when we have things that we're not completely 110%
Yes.
we don't feel super positive on that we're trying,
Yes.
that we be able to, go back and forth. So, I mean, I don't think
And there
by
was
any,
a public process originally
yeah, well, it's
in
public.
this project itself. It had a lot of people championing it. And this
There's
is
nothing
about
wrong. I'm
9
not
months.
here to champion the project. It's nothing about the project. It's about the contract. I'm just concerned about the contract for the
Noted.
city's vitality for the long haul, regardless whether we're a walking the earth in 150 years or
noted.
Well,
not.
and we appreciate your comments.
Thank
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other testimony? Come on up.
Well, a lot of it.
Please state your name for the record.
Robert Van Allen. I just want to call to your attention section 1.23 of this thing. We were told that at the end of the lease term, it was the city had an option to sell. In fact, the buyer gets an option to buy the
Yes,
property
that's
for
what-
$10.
Mm-hmm.
Now, damn it, you can't make a deal to sell the property without having an appraisal, and you haven't had an appraisal. If you don't understand that, well, I said yes to talk to your lawyer about it.
Thank you.
And that was.
Any other public comment? Okay. Hearing's closed. I'm going to take a quick bathroom break and let these girls reset their computer, and we'll be right back for the next public hearing.